Happy Saturday. It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show. Greg Ehrenberg here, joined with T. McBee, Terry McBride again. Terry, it had been, a second since we'd done a show together. Now, all of a sudden, we're doing shows back to back. Tyler doesn't have to change anything in his Zoom setup because we're just already the names written in there. So how you doing? How was your night?
It's uneventful night DFS-wise. Did not come out on top. Made a few of the wrong calls pitching-wise, so got beat up there a little bit. But I cut out about halfway through and went and saw Black Widow instead. Went into the city. Took a nice little adventure on the bus to get into the city. It was sold out in Jersey, so I went over there, caught that. Can definitely recommend it to any of our Marvel fan friends out there. But yeah, that was my night. How about you, bud?
So I got lucky because on FanDuel, overall my lineups weren't terrible, but they weren't great either. But my best lineup on FanDuel happened to be the lineup I played in single entry. So it was a Phillies and Red Sox stack with Kenta Maeda as a pitcher. So that kind of covered for my night. So it didn't matter that I had a bunch of crappy lineups because the one I was the most invested in ultimately ended up being my best one. So definitely JD Martinez helped out there. Alex Verdugo helped out. And then some of the other decisions didn't really matter as much. But today brings a new slate. Actually, today brings two new slates because we're going to be covering the early slate. So it is a 5-game slate on FanDuel, 6-game slate on DraftKings for the early slate. Then we have the main slate that is 6 games on both sites. We have the Pittsburgh Mets game. That's going to be doubleheader. That's included on DK for the early slate, not included on FanDuel. So we will jump right into those. But first, guys, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you're new to PrizePicks, guys, this is prop-based contest. And also, you're not going to be playing, in big field DFS tournaments. Don't have to worry about ownership or any of that. It's just going to be looking at the props. Which ones do you like, taking guys over? And you could parlay all different things together. If you're into esports and you want to parlay together how many kills that some guy in some sport I've never heard of is going to get in a game, you could parlay that with soccer goals, with basketball points, with strikeouts for pitchers. There's all different ways to make fun combinations over at PrizePicks. New to the site, head on over to PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code Awesemo. Get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. So go check that out. That is promo code Awesemo over at PrizePicks.com. But Terry, let's jump into today's game, starting with the early slate. And one game that I felt, very important to talk about right off the bat. Chicago White Sox against the Baltimore Orioles. And there's a couple of things that are really going to stand out here. First of all, anytime an offense is going up against the Baltimore Orioles, they're in a great spot. They're also more often than not going to be very popular, which is once again the situation we have today. And then the pitcher going for the Chicago White Sox is Lucas Giolito, who seems to really be struggling without getting the extra grip from the foreign substances. So we're going to hit on both of those. But first, let's start with the White Sox stack. They're going to be the chalk of the early slate. But do you think the 20+% ownership for them is warranted?
Oh, man, it's a tough spot based on that. Everybody that I want to get to in this lineup, with the exception of maybe Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets at the bottom end of the lineup, is going to be super, super heavy owned. With a short slate, you can swallow a little bit more ownership than that, but putting all those guys together, the top 5 hitters, is going to be a tall order to get any kind of differentiation in your lineups, and you're spending a lot of money to get there, at least across the top 3 hitters. So it's going to walk you down a really specific avenue of what you can possibly put with these guys, what pitchers you can get to with them. For me, that's a tough ask. I tend to try and walk away from ownership that heavy. I would want to have some for sure, but I think that looks like an undercut to me. And then looking across the industry on the FanDuel slate, they're even more highly owned on FanDuel. We're talking about 40% Tim Anderson, almost 40% John Moncada, 35 on Abreu. So these guys are up through the roof on that site, all the way down through Adam Engel in the 5-hole at 2,000 in the projected lineup. The back end, again, it's Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets back there, but they're getting into the mid-teens. It's an uncomfortable spot. I love the opportunity for their offense going up against Tom Eshelman in Camden Yards. Like you said, great hitting environment. There's some weather coming up the East Coast. I haven't had a chance to look game by game in the specific weather situations, but I would keep an eye on that as well. Just a lot of different things to potentially be concerning, but the ownership is by far the biggest concern here. If you can find creative ways to put them together, absolutely. They're in a killer spot and it's a good lineup. It's just tough to do.
Yeah, the weather in this game, currently 0% chance of rain. So at least this game is not going to be a massive concern. As for the ownership, it's interesting because if you look at the overall top stack stool and the ownership for the teams here, we have the Chicago White Sox, 24% projected ownership on FanDuel, 22.5% chance of being a top stack. It's not that bad. And then on DraftKings, also 22% projected ownership, 22.1% chance of being a top stack. So that all said, it looks about appropriate. But like you said, the issue is the guys that we actually want to get to in the White Sox lineup ridiculously highly owned. Tim Anderson, Yohan Moncada, the guys that actually matter. So if you're going to make White Sox stacks, I think there's no way around. You just have to mix in one or two of the cheap guys at the end of the order that aren't picking up as much ownership. And that to me is what makes it doable. If you're going to play the 4 most popular White Sox players, you're just competing against, like a third of the field.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want to just walk into the slate holding hands with that many people. It's just going to get you into, if the lineup wins, you're going to be tied with a bunch of people splitting your profits and not going anywhere. And if the lineup tanks, you're going to just be riding it down into the bottom with so many other people. You want to be in a different spot when a really popular spot like this tanks. And that's what we're looking for here. So yeah, I agree with you. It would be about getting to, if you're building with them, it would be about, again, Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets. And maybe, is Zach Collins interesting to you at all at the bottom end of that projected lineup as a catcher, at least on DK? It looks like he's pulling a lot of ownership. He's an interesting bat who's never really come through. 236, 333, 390 in his limited opportunity, 142 plate appearances this year. He's supposed to have a good stick, but it's just, at that ownership, I think I can even find a different catcher.
Yeah, for catcher, whenever there's a cheap catcher that's in a good spot, it works for stacks. But once again, it is a lot of ownership there. It's probably not somebody to play as a one-off outside of stacks. But yeah, another guy that I would probably ultimately be coming in underweight to the field on. But yeah, it is kind of hard to differentiate with the offense on the White Sox. The only thing I could say is maybe if we're going to play White Sox X, try to differentiate a pitcher. Maybe find a pitcher, whether it be Anthony Desclafani, maybe playing James Kaprelian. Because if you play a different pitcher, particularly on FanDuel on a single pitcher site, because there's so much ownership going to Giolito 40% owned, projected Max Fried 26%. If you're playing any of these single digit owned pitchers, then I think the White Sox, at least for FanDuel purposes, become a little bit more viable just because people aren't playing them as much. Let's talk about Giolito now, because to me, there is so much variance in Giolito. I think just given the context of the slate, we have to play him. But I'm going to be underweight to the field, and I'm going to be taking some stabs at stacking against him just because the numbers as of late for Lucas Giolito have been so poor, even in good matchups. Last time out, he was against the Detroit Tigers, and he sucked against the Tigers. And I think a lot of that can go to, some of what we've seen with him not being able to use sticky substances. So I'm pulling up his spin rate numbers right now, but what's your read on Giolito right now?
Yeah, it seemed like he's been trended down a little bit earlier in the season anyway, and kind of never rebounded. So I've been kind of off that train. I haven't looked specifically into the sticky stuff just because of where the numbers have kind of landed. I haven't searched for the explanation yet, but 28.9% strikeout rate is down. A 3.63 xFIP is fine, but a 1.16 whip, putting a few guys on base with a 7.7% walk percentage, inducing 15.6% swinging strikes is really good. So the swing and miss is still there. 30% CSW percentage, so he's still throwing strikes. He's just getting hit hard. 9.1% barrel ball rate, a 19.4 degree average launch angle, 37.4% hard hit rate, and 88.3 average exit velo tempers that a little bit. But just like home run trajectory he's giving up here, just giving up too much premium contact, which suggests to me, yeah, it's a guy who doesn't have his full usual command and ability to place the ball, which partly is due to that grip issue, I would think. So yeah, it makes some sense here. I do think, however, just given the choices that we've got on this slate, to me, it's him. It's basically the guys that you said are drawing ownership, right? It's him and Fried. And then if you want to get different, it's Rogers and Kaprelian. I don't really want to look to too much of obviously not Tom Eshelman, John Lester, Fulte. Martin Perez is not a comfortable roster on this slate. So I just think we need Giolito here more than I want to roster Giolito here. That said, it's not a terrible spot, of course, going up against Baltimore as a right-handed pitcher. They're around league average in terms of their strikeout rate, a little below average with their 157 team ISO, create runs 13% worse than average, 3.31% home run rate in the split is also below average. So it's not a good offense against the right-handed pitching that he's going up against. He could have a good start here, but I could also easily see a path where they put a few runs on him.
Yeah, and the spin rate for Giolito, he was pretty regularly sitting at between, anywhere from 2,000 to 2,200 RPMs per start over the course of the season. And his last two starts, two lowest spin rate average of any starts of the season, 1944, and the start before that, 1845. So definitely some red flags there. As for Giolito, once again, if you're playing cash games for the early slate, play him in cash just based on the ownership and the matchup. But for tournaments, I'm going to be underweight to the field, and I'm also going to be stacking against him a little bit. He's somebody who I have not rostered a whole bunch of lately, and just the results haven't been there. So I think he's a little bit overrated at this point. I don't think the field, or in general, just the books, have caught up to the quality of pitcher Lucas Giolito is now. And I know that we had somebody in the YouTube chat ask, and I want to give them credit for it. Here, it was R in the YouTube chat says, does anyone like the over in the Chicago White Sox game if Giolito is struggling now? You know, it's something I would be interested in. I'm going to check this up really quick to see what the team total is for the Orioles. And then this is another spot too, where with some of these high variance starting pitchers, I kind of like betting alternate team totals because there's such a wide range of outcomes for some of these pitchers that maybe just the Orioles have a team total of like over under 4 at, you know, like minus 110 on both sides. And, you know, that would be okay bet, but I'd almost prefer to go to like, if you get like over 5.5 for like plus 250, if that's available at a book you like to look at, just because it's a spot where there's so much volatility with Giolito. You know, if he pitches 7 innings, gives up 1 run, I wouldn't be surprised by that, but I don't think he's any more likely to do that than he is to, you know, just get kind of hit around and give up, you know, like 5 runs over 7 innings or anything like that. So I prefer the alternate run totals in some of these high variance spots. But Orioles stacks, is that something you think you might be on for leverage for this slate?
Yeah, I think it definitely makes some sense given how much Giolito is going to be owned and everything we just talked about with the struggles. I really like what you're saying there too about seeking out those alternate run totals because yeah, if you want to make that bet that they're going to get to him, we'll make the bet that they're going to get to him and get paid on it and get a couple extra runs out of it. So I like that a lot. Just looking at the same at the spin rate graph, it's interesting too. It looks like he just started throwing his curveball at the end of May, and then after 2 or 3 games, it took a precipitous dive in spin. He barely ever uses it, but it's just interesting that he added it back into his repertoire after not throwing it for the first part of the year here. Just, I guess, looking to mix things up and maybe get a little bit more swing and miss with another breaking ball in there. But then it seems like he's not throwing it all that effectively. So just interesting what he's done there. And then, yeah, pretty precipitous drop on the spin on the slider over the last 5 games. The fastball has come down some. So, yeah, it's definitely impacting. There's something to this.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too. It's kind of like we talked about with Garrett Richards yesterday. Some of these guys, they just have to change their picks. You know, there's certain pitches they're just not able to throw anymore. And they're just kind of grasping at straws like, hey, let's just throw spaghetti at the wall, see light sticks. You know, let's try this curveball. Doesn't work. All right, ditch the curveball, go to some other breaking ball. And so, you know, there's definitely a lot of guys trying to figure it out on the fly. But then some of the other guys that we have to look at on this slate, a la Matt Moore pitching in Boston, somebody who hasn't been good for forever. It doesn't matter. Sticky substances, no sticky substances. He can throw whatever pitches he wants. He's generally not going to find success. I know that we're not going to be interested in Matt Moore here, but the question then just becomes, how much of the Red Sox we want to stack here, because much like the White Sox, this is going to be a super, super popular stack. The difference with Boston, though, is that Boston does look fairly highly negatively leveraged in our top stacks. So we have Boston with the highest negative leverage score of any team on the slate, even more so than the White Sox. So what happened yesterday, the Red Sox absolutely went off. It was a spot against Vince Velasquez that both of us liked, you know, quite a bit for Boston. Today, once again, I think this is a good spot for Boston on paper. The difference here, though, is they're picking up 27% projected ownership on FanDuel, 24% projected ownership on DK as the most popular stack on the slate. If I'm paying up for a popular stack, I'd personally rather go to the White Sox than the Red Sox.
Yeah, I guess because I think there's a few spots like the guys that I mentioned a few times at the back end of that order, not to keep hitting on those guys, but at least you're getting some kind of ownership offset with those guys at the back end of the order. With Boston, you're just not seeing that. These guys are in the 20s and 30s throughout, unless we want to talk about on FanDuel, Kevin Plawecki at the minimum is giving you 5% ownership. Everybody else is well into double digits. And then you change sites, and Kevin Plawecki is the highest owned Red Sox on the DK slate because he's also the minimum price over there where you need a catcher. He's coming in like 30% owned. It's just a difficult team to roster, but man, talk about a good spot. This Red Sox team against a god-awful lefty. Matt Moore, 5.34 xFIP, a 1.68 whip, putting guys on base, 11% walk rate, 11.1% barrel rate. So that BBB minus K number, I've gotten the negative part of it fixed. So it's a -4, one of the worst marks on the board. Just a guy that we can absolutely expect to put too many guys on base and give up some home run power here. So I see another big game for the Red Sox. The home run meter is burying the needle for them in terms of all their power here. I just don't know how to get to them in any kind of unique combinations. Even Bobby Dalbec in the 9-hole pulling like 20% ownership on the FanDuel slate. So it's a tough ask. I want to figure it out. If I'm playing this slate, I'm going to have some Red Sox. I'll probably be below the field, and I'll probably be doing it with unique, weird pitching. But it's just really difficult to put these guys together with any of the premium pitchers, any of the other premium bats.
Yeah, so just knowing how my process works when I go and end up submitting the final version of my lineups, which I mean, we still have, 5 hours until the slate lock, so it's not something I've done yet. Based on the current data we have, I'd probably be somewhere around 10% Red Sox stacks. So they'd be in my player pool, but still that's, only about, 35% of what the field has in terms of total stacks. It's just so hard on any sort of slate for me in my process to get to any individual team that's this negatively leveraged. That's going to be in, 25, 26% of the field's lineup. So I have him in there. I just think the ownership isn't quite justified. On the other side of the game, Martin Perez, another spot that's not bad for the Phillies, although I don't really stack against Martin Perez heavily all that often, just because he's a heavy ground ball pitcher. He doesn't have very many good fantasy outings. But the thing with Perez is just because he's such a heavy ground ball pitcher, and he's fairly steady. He's a guy who has a lot of starts where it's, like 6 innings, 4 runs, 7 innings, 4 runs, 6 innings, 3 runs. There's a lot of bad for real life starts for Martin Perez, but not to a point where for fantasy purposes, he's just totally getting obliterated. So if you look at his numbers for the year, he's only allowed more than 5 runs once the entire season. He's only allowed 4 or more runs 3 times the entire season. So there just aren't that many games where Martin Perez really, to me, seems to give up a whole lot of GPP upside. Also, if you look at his home run numbers, he's only given up multiple homers once the entire season. So Martin Perez, the Phillies, I just think is a neutral spot. I'm not really dying to roster them.
Yeah, and that's kind of how they're coming up on my board. They project okay in the DFS points. They don't get a ton of home run upside given his propensity to keep the ball in the park, keep the ball on the ground to a decent degree. 10.2 average launch angle is, line drive level, ground ball level, 7.8% barrel rate, puts him right around the middle of the league, 39.8% hard hit, and 88.2 mile an hour average exit velo. Not the best trends towards home run. It kind of supports everything you just said there. What I do like is if you're rostering him, if you're rostering Phillies, he's not the biggest strikeout guy by any means. 18.3% strikeout rate, a 4.58 xFIP. He's putting guys on base with a 1.44 whip, only induces 7.5% swinging strikes, has a CSW of 26.1, all well below average. So it's not a pitcher that I'm particularly inclined to attack anymore. It's weird. I used to go after him a decent amount. He used to create big numbers against in my model, and that's been tempered over the last couple of years. I guess he's been doing something under the covers that I haven't bothered to look into because who cares? It's Martin Perez. But it's definitely taken like the top off of the home run upside again for the opposing teams. So I think I would get to some Phillies. Like I like through the middle of the lineup, the Real Muto, Harper, McCutchen, Hoskins stack on the FanDuel side. Comparatively with all these big ownership numbers we've seen on good teams so far, those guys are at like half the ownership for the core of the Phillies offense here. So I think based on that, I can maybe get to some of them, maybe a little bit more aggressively than what it sounds like you're planning on doing. But it's not a great spot given what we were just saying about Perez. I would expect it to be probably, like that 5-run kind of a game, that 4-run kind of a game where we just don't get enough DFS upside. So you're kind of walking a fine line in doing it. But I do think based on the ownership and just the skill level of some of these hitters, if you're going to that core, it might make sense to grab a little bit more than the field just because it's a short enough slate. They're talented enough. There is that upside, hitters park, et cetera, et cetera. So I can come up with some reasons to get there, but it's not the greatest spot in the world.
Listen, so we talked about a lot of offense we like so far. Finally, we're going to get to a pitcher that I like a little bit tonight, and this one's going to be mostly for ownership reasons. The Washington Nationals in San Francisco taking on the Giants. The Giants, at least for the FanDuel slate, are the biggest favorite on the early slate at minus 200. On the DK slate, the Mets are minus 208, so slightly bigger favorites than the Giants, but there is almost no ownership going to Anthony Desclafani relative to what his current ownership is. I think he's the pitcher that warrants to go overweight to the most. So right now on FanDuel, we have Desclafani only projected for 5% ownership, but a 13% chance of being one of the top, being the top overall scoring pitcher on the slate. For DraftKings purposes, Desclafani only picking up 5% ownership with a 21% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers. For sure, just if you're looking at on paper, Lucas Giolito is going to project better than Anthony Desclafani. Trevor Rogers is going to project better than Anthony Desclafani. It just becomes a difference in ownership, where Desclafani is 1/10 the ownership of these guys, and they aren't 10x more likely to outscore him. So for fantasy purposes, I'm going to be pretty heavily overweight to the field on Desclafani. He's one of my favorite GPP options.
Yeah, I like the spot given that ownership differential for sure. That's what really, really sells it for me. But then just look at my pitching projections. This is not from the site. This is from my model. Desclafani, this FanDuel points, 33.37. Fried, 33.69. Giolito, 33.93. Kaprelian, 32.83. I've got all these guys projecting essentially the same right now. So I'm just going to, if I'm playing this slate, I'm honestly just playing the ownership game now that I'm noticing that it's like this. If all those guys project out basically the same for me, yeah, I'm going to grab the lower cost guys and go to a guy like Desclafani. I would grab some Trevor Rogers probably because he's a little bit lower on than like a Giolito, even though he's more expensive. And then it looks like I would probably have some Caprillion shares here too against Texas. But yeah, the Desclafani spot, now that I'm seeing that those guys all project out exactly the same based on that ownership, that would be a smash spot for me. Just taking a look at him, 101 and a third innings over 17 starts. So you're getting reliable depth here, getting a decent shot at a win, a quality start. 23.3% strikeout rate, not exactly what we want to see in terms of the strikeout upside. At 12.5 degree average launch angle, 8.3% barrel rate, 42.1% hard hit. We're getting a little concerning around some of those metrics, but the expected slugging is 58th percentile, expected slugging percentage, expected ERA, 71st percentile. So he's getting by. He's certainly not the highest upside pitcher overall, but I think it's a reasonable enough spot that we have some expectation of success here. And on a short slate, when he's projecting out similar to all these other guys, going up against the Nationals team that is, I'm going to say average in everything except for strikeouts. Their 22.6% strikeout rate puts them around 10th in the league, but below average 154 team ISO, below average 3.39% home run rate, create runs 4% worse than average against righties. I think there's a little bit of upside to squeeze here. It's more a potential for a good start rather than potential to smash through a strikeout ceiling kind of a start. But I think that might be all we really need to ask from Desclafani here.
Yeah, and then once again, the key here is really going to be just the ownership. And Eric Johnson in the YouTube chat, he said, "Do projections really matter in MLB DFS?" For me, not really. I mean, obviously, there's not a spot where I'm like, oh, Jacob deGrom versus Matt Moore, they should be projected for the same amount of fantasy points. Not to that extent. So yes, they do matter, but the things that are much more important to me are the ownership projections. And by the way, the main slate ownership projections, not the early slate, but the main slate ownership projections, those are going to be free on Awesemo.com. So if you're playing the main slate later tonight, definitely be sure to check those out. Free content. You can see some of the stuff that we're going to be looking at. But yeah, Desclafani here, just an ownership play. Also a little boost going to him because Kyle Schwarber's out for an extended period of time. Obviously, he was just out of his mind playing ridiculously. So not having him in there, that's going to also help out Desclafani a little bit. On the other side, we have John Lester, who he's been washed for a minute, John Lester. It's been a decline that, I mean, we could see coming if you're into some of the, advanced stats and some of the underlying numbers. There were years where even when John Lester had good ERAs, you looked at the underlying numbers, you go, oh, this is all going to fall apart soon. Most notably, that was in 2018 with John Lester at a 3.32 ERA, but he had 4.99 expected ERA, 4.39 FIP. And just be like, oh, the end of John Lester's run, it's here. John Lester is once an elite starting pitcher. And, ever since then, he's had an ERA right around 5 this year, 5.34 ERA, 5.73 FIP. So Lester, the velocity has been on decline for a while now. Average fastball velocity 89.4 miles per hour. So how heavily are you looking to stack against John Lester with the Giants offense? It's been surprisingly good this year.
Yeah, Giants' best home run rate in baseball with against left-handed pitching, 4.68% home run rate. The next best mark on the board, 4.44 for the Atlanta Braves. So that's a decent little delta in between those two. They create runs 7% better than average against lefties, a 174 team ISO. They strike out 23.2% of the time, so that's around league average right now. It's not like they're going up against a strikeout pitcher, though, so I expect a lot of contact, a lot of balls in play against John Lester. He's striking out 14.9% of hitters over 60 2/3 this year, 5.30 xFIP, a 1.63 whip, walking 9.4% of hitters. I feel bad talking about some of these other numbers. It's a definitely targetable spot. Grab some of those Giants, and they're actually a little bit lower owned than I would expect in this spot going up against Lester. You can get to some of these hitters with mid-teens type of ownership, and then you get down to like Brandon Crawford under 10%. I like that spot. It's not the greatest version of this lineup, I guess, with Thairo Estrada up toward the top there. But there are some decent hitters here and guys that you can grab at reasonable ownership and low cost. Clean up Darren Ruff for 2,200 on FanDuel. He'll draw some attention, but I like that spot for a little bit of sneaky power. He's not going to be owned over 20%, I wouldn't think. So I think that's sneaky enough. And then you're putting him together with like Yaz with Crawford. You can offset any of the ownership that comes in with Slater there. So I like the spot for the Giant stack. I would have 0.0 shares of John Lester.
Yeah, and then also one last thing to add before we go on. The Giants, they do have one of the most positive leverage scores on DraftKings for today. Only 6.5% projected ownership, 9.4% chance of being a top stack. So to me, I love the spot against John Lester. Definitely a place that I want to be overweight to. Next game here, the Oakland A's in Texas taking on the Rangers. pick 'em money line. James Kaprielian against Mike Foltynewicz. Foltynewicz still throws hard, but he had like one good year when he was younger. That's way in the past. Kaprielian's been a little bit interesting this year. He has had some good starts at lower ownership. And, this is another spot where if I'm going for a low-owned pitcher, I certainly prefer Anthony Desclafani to Kaprielian. But once again, Kaprielian does look a little bit under-owned. So for me personally, if I'm going to be underweight to the field on Lucas Giolito, I have to find guys to be overweight to. And two of the guys for a little bit of a cheaper price tag that makes sense to me are going to be Anthony Desclafani and James Kaprielian. Kaprielian right now on DraftKings, we have him projected for only 13.5% projected ownership, 22% chance of being a top 2 scoring pitcher. So another guy that I want to be overweight to. I prefer Anthony Desclafani if you're playing a single entry and you're trying to choose between the two of them. As a lower owned starting pitcher, I prefer Desclafani, but large field tournaments, I'm going to be overweight to the field on Kaprielian as well. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I agree. He was in that group of guys that was projecting basically the same. So based on that ownership, based on being below 10% on FanDuel, 13.5 over on DK, that's a spot I want to be on. And just like you said, if I'm carving shares away from a guy who's going to be highly owned like Luke Giolito, maybe take a few shares away from Max Fried as well, I'm going to need to put it somewhere. And Kaprielian's popping out as one of those guys. I like the average depth of start that he's giving us. He's pitching well. It's pretty deep in the game. 7 innings, 6 innings, 6 innings the last 3, 5 2/3 before that, 6 innings. And then, we're kind of getting stretched out earlier than that. But he's giving us nice, reliable depth. I don't want to say I disagree with Vegas that this is a pick'em game because they know more than I do. They built a big city doing this and I haven't. But going up against Folty with this A's lineup, I like the chances for the A's to have a little bit of power, a little bit of upside here. So to me, this is more a good chance at a win here for Kaprielian, good chance of getting that quality start. He's striking out 27% of hitters this season, a 1.07 whip, inducing 11.7% swinging strikes, pitching really well for a rookie. He gives up an 18.1 degree average launch angle and an 8.9% barrel ball rate with a 46.6% hard hit rate and an average exit velo of 92 miles an hour. That gets concerning when we start talking about guys like Joey Gallo, guys like Adolis Garcia in this lineup, maybe Nate Lowe. But I'm not that worried about it because there are strikeouts available for him here. If he gets through clean, I think he puts up a decent start. Texas, 9th worst in baseball, 24.6% strikeout rate against righties. A 3.7% home run rate puts him right around the league average, so there is that power threat. They create runs 11% worse than average in the split with the 155 team ISO. I think it's a good spot for Kaprielian here. So if the field's not going there, that's really what it's all about. And to go back to that question, yeah, projections in baseball are it's a guide rail. Right? If I notice something like what you guys just saw me in real time notice that, hey, holy shit, these pitchers, the 40% owned guy and the 5% owned guy project within a half a point of one another for me. All right, that's a guide rail. That's just telling me something about the slate. Do I expect that they're both going to come out and put up exactly 33 points? Would I bet anything on that? No, not at all. The projection's just a guide rail. It's just kind of telling you where things are and giving you the idea of the shape of the slate, where it might be headed.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the game, we did have Eric Johnson in the chat said, if I like the pitcher for the A's, Kaprielian, does that mean I like the offense? It's kind of funny. I don't like the A's offense because I like Kaprielian and vice versa. They don't have anything to really do with each other. However, I like the A's offense because I don't really like Mike Foltynewicz, that and the A's. So the two teams on DraftKings that have the most positive leverage scores as a stack, it is the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland A's. Those are two teams that I'm going to be looking to get the most heavy overweights to the field on large field tournaments. The other thing Mike Foltynewicz too is not only have the results not been good, the last time he had a start where he did not allow a home run, May 23rd. So we've got a guy in Mike Foltynewicz who a lot of balls get put in the air against him. A lot of them get hit hard. Only a 36.4% ground ball rate and a 16.5% home run to fly ball rate. Anytime you see a guy who gives up a lot of fly balls and also has a high home run to fly ball rate, there's a lot of upside in targeting them. And then you also mix in the upside and the power that the A's offense has. Foltynewicz's numbers this year, 5.17 ERA, 5.3 expected ERA. I like the A's offense quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just loaded with power. A lot of premium lefty bats in there to get some power against him. So absolutely. This is a guy he's been a punching bag for me basically all season. I was targeting the home runs last year. I was targeting the home runs coming into this year. He was rewarding me throughout. He went on that one little stretch around that last time, the end of May there, where he actually went 3 straight games without giving up a home run. I was panicking. And then all of a sudden it came back and he's given up multiple home runs in several of these games, at least one, like you said, all the way down. Just doesn't have it, not there anymore. 26th percentile overall barrel rate, only a 10th percentile strikeout rate, 22nd percentile hard hit, 10th percentile expected slugging percentage on the board here. It's just It is not a good pitcher. This is a targetable spot for offense. I'd be looking at Matt Olson. I'd be looking at Matt Chapman, Sean Murphy, Seth Brown, I think is a somewhat sneaky lefty bat for power. He's only 2,100 on the FanDuel slate too. That's a mistake price in this matchup. Nice little home run opportunity spot for Seth Brown if he's in the lineup. I don't love the idea of Elvis Andrus up toward the top of the lineup. I talked about that yesterday with his 281 on base. It looks like he did pick up another stolen base yesterday. I think he was at 7 yesterday. He's got 8 now. I might be misremembering that, but just I don't think the skill set is there necessarily anymore for Elvis. But getting around Ramon Laureano up top into Olson, Lowry, Chapman, Murphy, Brown, I think from the top to the bottom, you can roster this A's lineup in different combinations.
Yeah, like I said, if you're somebody who's just playing the ownership game like I do, the teams that I have the most interest in relative to the field's ownership, Giants and the A's. Next game here, these are two offenses I don't like very much. The Atlanta Braves against the Miami Marlins. This game has a total of 7. That is the lowest total of any of the full 9-inning games on the slate. Max Fried against Trevor Rogers. A little bit of a disappointing season for Max Fried, and Rogers has maybe been not quite as good lately as he was early in the year, but there's a lot of good offenses against bad pitchers in the early slate, and these are two at least solid starting pitchers. So I don't like either of the offenses. The pitchers then are where I'm going to draw more of the interest. But first, Terry, do you like either of the offenses against Fried or Rogers?
I mean, just based on the idea that they're kind of low owned, except for Acuna, of course, I think maybe I could grab a few shares of Brave stacks, but it wouldn't be anything I'd go way out of my way for. And I'd just be playing the potential game with a 4.44% home run rate for that team against left-handed pitching is second best in baseball. 191 team ISO against lefties is best in baseball. They're 1% worse than average despite that creating runs against lefties, and they strike out 24.7% of the time against lefties, which is below average. So I could both sides this one pretty easily. I think there's good opportunity for Rogers to put up a nice start. 16-ish% ownership. It's a little bit more than I'd like, but it's fine. I can roster some of that. And I can also take out some Brave stacks against them. But I don't think I would press too far with it because I do have enough respect, at least, for Rogers. And like you said, I think there's some other spots that I would just prefer to be on, other pitchers that I would prefer to attack. So for me, it's more about the pitchers in this one as well.
And then if you have to roster one of these starting pitchers, I think that both of them certainly warrant exposure on this slate. But would you rather be higher on Max Fried or Trevor Rogers? For me, not to lead you and force you in an answer, but it's Fried just because he's pitching against the Marlins and Rogers pitches against the Braves today.
That would have been my exact answer. Absolutely. They project out pretty well. You also pick up a little bit of a discount on Fried salary-wise. He's drawing a little bit more ownership on, it looks like both sites. It's closer on the DK slate. A little bit more separation, I guess, on the FanDuel, but not incredibly egregious. And based on the matchup that you're picking up, I like that. I like that upside. The strikeouts, you're sacrificing a little bit of strikeouts, but you're probably picking up a little bit more quality, probably walking into a pitcher that's a little bit less risky, just given the upside of the opposing team.
All right. And then final game on the slate, not on the FanDuel slate, only on the DraftKings slate. It is a 7-inning doubleheader game. Marcus Stroman on the mound for the Mets, Tyler Anderson for the Pirates. Now, I very rarely roster heavily the stacks in 7-inning games. The problem is, like, the Mets are minus 208 favorites in this spot, so they're fairly likely to win. That means they're only going to get 6 innings in all likelihood. So you're cutting everybody's plate appearances by at least 1 there. That's a little bit of an issue for me. Marcus Stroman on the mound. You know, he's okay. He's a safe starting pitcher, but one of the issues I have with Stroman as an upside play for tournaments, he generally brings more floor to the table than actual upside because he's a guy who doesn't strike out all that many hitters. So Marcus Stroman as a safety play, I'm fine with him. He's also going to be pretty popular though. So Stroman, fine as a low-owned option, but I would rather get to guys like Caprelli or Anthony Desclafani, and no interest in stacking the offenses just because of the shortened game with the doubleheader. If you look at our top stacks tool, we only have the Mets with a 2% chance of being a top stack, the Pirates a 1% chance. That's going to happen in 7-inning games. So how do you usually handle the 7-inning games for DFS stacking purposes?
So fortunately, FanDuel's just kind of made the decision to just not include these most of the time, which I prefer. I would just, kind of leave these out if I was the DFS sites and making these decisions. But I agree with you. I would be basically avoiding offenses just on the idea that we're just going to be giving up way too much opportunity, way too many plate appearances there. And yeah, if you get premium pitchers in these spots where you're getting a 7-inning start, a good chance at a complete game shutout kind of a start, then sure, we can go to the pitchers. But for these two guys, it's not really a spot for me. I don't go to Stroman in full games. I don't go to Stroman most of the time for DFS purposes. Like you said, I think he's a better real life pitcher. I don't really go to Tyler Anderson. I don't go to the Pirates offense anyway most of the time. So really for me, all I'd be taking off the board here, I think, is the Mets offense going up against Tyler Anderson. And I'm fine with doing that. There's other spots on this slate.
Yeah, and then one quick question here from Eric Johnson before we move on to talking about the main slate. But he said, aren't 7-inning games better for starting pitchers, not so well for bats? It is certainly worse for bats. For starting pitchers, I mean, you could make an argument for DraftKings purposes. They're more likely to pick up the complete game bonus, the shutout bonus. But at the same time, also, if they're pitching really well, they can't go past 7 innings. Whereas, the extra 8th or 9th inning could get extra upside. For starting pitchers, I don't really think it changes all that much. I think that the ability to go past 7 innings compared to the ability to just get the 7 innings complete game, I think that's kind of a wash. So for pitchers, I don't think it really matters. For bats, it's definitely a downgrade. Would you about agree with that, Terry?
Yeah, definitely 100% agree. Downgrade for bats. And yeah, the only pitchers that I would consider it kind of a boost for are these guys, these absolute workhorse guys. Lance Lynn last year, who was pitching 8 innings every start, regardless of what was going on. A guy like that, if you're seeing a 7-inning game, sure. The other monkey wrench to throw into that equation is a lot of times you're picking up these 7-inning games because something was postponed. So a guy got to start bumped back by a day. Sometimes that has wacky effects on pitchers. It's all non-quantifiable stuff that is kind of a lot of noise around what we do. But I would counter anything with that. Just saying, all right, they got delayed an extra day. That would take away any additional uptick from the 7 innings. So yeah, it's something I try not to press too much in either direction. Like we were talking about before the show, I do let the Vegas run totals kind of dictate. So if we had a 7-inning game with an 11-run total on it somehow, I'd probably be getting to some of that.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. And then also the run total, it's going to be reflected in the Vegas totals. That's the reason why Mets Pittsburgh game, it has a 6.5 run total because it's a game that it is less innings. So we're not expecting it to be not as many chances for runs to be scored. Guys, if you want to get a chance to look at some of the tools and the stuff that Terry and I are talking about, particularly ownership, we talked about how much that matters to us. Go check it out, Awesemo.com. If you're a new sign up to Awesemo, you could check out the Awesemo Plus Platinum. If you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That is all capital letters, all one word, MLB Strategy Show. And you can get 25% off your first week of an Awesemo Plus package. Also, if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you get an MLB weekly package for $15.99. So all stuff you can check out, and you get access to all the tools that Terry and I are talking about as we're doing the shows here. Now, for the main slate, heading over to that, the first game I put on just because it's kind of a write-off for me right now. It is the Cubs going up against the St. Louis Cardinals, Zach Davies against Kwang Hung Kim. It is a very bad hitting environment if the game plays. I don't like either of the pitchers for fantasy purposes. But then on top of that, there's currently a 60% chance of rain in this game. So as of now, it's something to keep an eye on. But right now, it looks to me more likely to not play than it is to play. And then even if it goes, 2 pitchers I don't have interest in. And then if it does play, a little bit of cooler temperatures and wind blowing in 13 miles per hour at Wrigley. So this is a game that just as a whole, I don't really like all that much.
Yeah, I'm with you. The thing I would miss in this one, I think, if it doesn't play, would be maybe some Cubs bats against Kwang Hung Kim there. I'm getting decent power marks through the core of that lineup, decent DFS projections, and they're not that highly owned. I'm curious if it didn't have that much weather risk on it, how much the ownership would probably go up, because I do think it is a good spot here for the Cubbies. The other way, the cards against Zach Davies, righty for most of their power bats. Not really wild about that. Not going to miss that one too much. So it'd really be about taking the Cubs bats away from the stack. I'm not interested in either one of these pitchers.
Yeah, and by the way, Terry, I don't know if you saw, but there's a poll up right now in the YouTube chat, which is Team Terry haircut or no haircut. It is the people are debating. For some reason, we find it is very funny because we do these shows. The YouTube channel. Our audience for the most part, it's like 95% male audience. Yet so obsessed with our appearances everywhere we go. I've never been judged so much based on Greg's sunburnt. Look, his hair's longer, his hair's shorter. Terry gets a haircut. It's listen, it's the pressure cooker. There's a lot of pressure on us to look beautiful on these shows.
It's all. I feel like we're pledging a sorority and they're circling our flaws at this point. I mean, my God, this is unbelievable. But yeah, I finally got the long locks, got rid of the Josh's dad look that everybody was loving all that time. I went down the beginning of the week, walked down to a barbershop that I used to go to during the pandemic. They changed my barbershop into a cafe because the one thing that does better than a barbershop during a pandemic, I guess, is a restaurant. So I had to find a new barbershop, but yeah, pretty happy with the cut. Finally got rid of that long hair that was, whoa. At no point did I think that looked good. Let's put it that way.
So you've gone from Josh's dad to Josh's principal.
Oh, that's better.
So there we go. That's going to be the new nickname whenever we see Terry. It's Terry's now Josh's principal. But anyway, yeah. Keep an eye on the weather for the Cubs Cardinals game. Also, I know Emac was in the YouTube chat. He's going to be doing live before lock later on today with Gunbacker, and they'll have more weather updates. That this slate doesn't start for 7.5 hours at this point, so the weather could always change quite a bit. So that is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. Next game here, this is the team biggest favorite of the entire day for either slate. Walker Buehler and the Dodgers pitching against the Arizona Diamondbacks. So fairly low run total because the Diamondbacks are basically not expected to score in this spot. Dodgers massive favorites at -315. Walker Buehler is as safe as it gets tonight, and I'm surprised he's not chalkier, particularly on FanDuel as a single pitcher site. Only 25% ownership going to Walker Buehler. I think that he's the pretty clear choice for cash games tonight. And then for DraftKings purposes, we have Walker Buehler, a little more popular at 40%. But even with that said, Walker Buehler is the third most popular pitching option on DraftKings tonight. That it shouldn't be the case, in my opinion. I think he should be more popular than guys like Freddie Peralta. I think he should be more popular than Joe Musgrove tonight. So I like Walker Buehler against the Arizona Diamondbacks quite a bit today, and I've really liked the safety he brings to the table, especially when pitching has been so volatile lately. I think this is one of the rare spots where I feel like pretty good about a starting pitcher.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm actually pretty happy to pay the 10 for Walker Buehler, and I'm glad that he's priced over 10 on the FanDuel slate because it's pushing some of that ownership to Peralta. It's pushing some of that ownership to Joe Musgrove, which it helps. He's still going to be 25% owned, so by a quarter of the field, you're going to be holding hands with a decent amount of people either way. But I do agree, we're buying a decent amount of safety with that. We're paying up to be a little bit different than some of these other lineups by getting to Buehler here. So I like the spot here. I think you just get a ton of safety out of them. Taking a look at where Arizona stands, they're below average in basically everything. 2.45 home run rate in the split is tied for worst in baseball. Create runs 17% worse than average against righties. 24.4% strikeout rate is 11th worst in baseball. 136 team ISO. They're not showing any power. They don't create runs. They strike out too much. It's a good spot for Buehler. He's regarded as maybe like an A your premium pitchers are like an A plus. Maybe he's a solid A minus given the 25.5% strikeout rate. He doesn't jump up to that 30+% strikeout ace level, but he does everything else really well. 5.7% walk rate, 3.74 xFIP, a 0.92 whip, induces 11.4% swinging strikes, gives you nice depth, 108 in the third innings and 17 starts. Love the opportunity for him to get a quality start and a win bonus here on the blue side. It's just a great spot for Walker Buehler here.
Yeah, and then on the other side, this is where the night slate is going to get a little risky, a little dicey for me. The most popular stack on the slate is going to be the Los Angeles Dodgers. Currently on DraftKings, we have them projected for an 18.2% ownership share. On FanDuel, we have a massive 25.2% ownership share going to the Dodgers. The most popular team on the slate, the most negatively leveraged team on the slate on both sides. We only have the Dodgers with about a 15% chance to be the top scoring team of the day. So you consider that they're about 25% owned. I like being way underweight to the Dodgers. And not only am I going to like being underweight to the Dodgers, not something I think we have to consider on FanDuel. As an SB2 on DraftKings, considering how much ownership is going to the Dodgers, how crazy am I for having a little bit of interest in Caleb Smith at 1% projected ownership?
I was hoping you'd say that. I really like that price, 7,100. It's the Dodgers. We're walking into a little of trouble there, but he's got a 26.4% strikeout rate on the year, 10.4% induced swinging strikes. The CSW is not where I'd like to see. I like to see a few more called strikes in addition to his decent swinging strikes. The xFIP's up 4.83. The biggest concern for me would be the walks, 11.2% walk rate. Gets a little concerning when we start working around some of the contact numbers. With an 8.7% barrel ball rate, a 22.6 degree average launch angle. But he's getting by because he only allows 31.7% hard contact, and he only allows an 86.2 mile an hour average exit velo. So it's a lot of fly balls that fall short. Now, against a team that's got some premium power here, that could get him in trouble. But I like the opportunity for him to have a decent start with no one on him at all. And at that price as an SP2 on DK, I would absolutely go over the field on him there. I think it's easy enough at 2% ownership. It's easy to go 3-5 times the field and not really sweat it too much. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know that I'd be doing the same thing at 8,300 as an SP1 or an SP only on FanDuel for 1%. But on DK, I like that spot. And then as far as the Dodgers offense goes, I think maybe they make a little bit more sense on DK where they're more expensive, more difficult to get to. If you can figure out a good way to do it, it takes some of the ownership off of a guy like Max Muncy, off of a guy like Cody Bellinger, where you can get to some quality and you're paying up to get to them. On FanDuel, those guys are just getting a ton of ownership. Muncy's at 3,700, Bellinger's at 3,300. $3,300 Cody Bellinger. I don't care that he's hitting 182, 303, 291 this year. That is a mistake price. That is something that people should be on. They are on it. I'm going to undercut the field on Dodger stacks, but I just think that's a total misprice on Cody Bellinger. Makes him super interesting.
Yeah, and then once again, it's kind of twofold too. The reason that, to me at least, Caleb Smith makes for a strong GPP play. And number one, is it something that I expect actual success out of? No, I just expect more success out of it than what the ownership dictates. And you just consider the Dodgers. They are so negatively leveraged in our top stacks. Well, negative 10% leverage score on FanDuel. We never generally see leverage scores that are that negative. And then, about minus 5% on DK. So once again, the most negatively leveraged stack there. So just by that nature, because of my process, I'm going to be underweight to Dodger stacks. And then you start to say like, okay, well, if the Dodger stacks fail, what happens? It's probably, Caleb Smith probably pitched okay. And I look at some of the other options. Joe Musgrove has been awful lately. I don't think Joe Musgrove at this point is any better than Caleb Smith. And Joe Musgrove is projecting for 50% ownership on DraftKings compared to 1% for Caleb Smith. I think these guys are almost, maybe not equal as plays because Joe Musgrove is such an easier matchup at home against the Rockies. But in terms of quality of pitcher, I don't think Joe Musgrove is significantly better than Caleb Smith. Caleb Smith's been fine this year. He has, 3.45 ERA. The underlying numbers aren't quite as strong, but 4.27 FIP, good strikeout stuff, 26.4% K rate. And just considering all the ownership's going to the Dodgers, and I want to be underweight to them anyway, I'm good with getting to like 10% Caleb Smith in large field GPPs, single entry lineups. I think I'm probably inclined to play Caleb Smith as an SP2 on DK and just stack somebody other than the Dodgers, just because, ownership for single entry, we usually see the most popular guys even become significantly more popular than normal. So yeah, I think Caleb Smith is a pretty strong GPP play, and certainly a spot where I'm going to end up losing on that more often than not, except the times you win on a play like that, they tend to be pretty significant wins. So Caleb Smith is somebody who I'm going to be looking at on DK, holding my nose and just hope it doesn't totally blow up. But then talking about go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, just to round off what you were just saying there, it's a great point at the end that you were making there, in that you do not have to be right about a call like that at all frequently. It's such great pot odds if you want to make it, compare it to poker, that once you hit that one time, you've paid off so many of the times that you tried to do it and it didn't come through, and then some. So you're getting so far ahead on the one time that it does come through and win for you. You do not need to be right about that kind of a call all that often for it to be the right play.
Yeah, and just to compare it to something in a different sport, is I place a lot of long odds futures bets, particularly in basketball and other starts, for instance, in another sport. And I was going back and looking at, I bet the Suns to win the championship this year at 50-1 before the season started. And I was looking back at some of my tweets when I was tweeting about it. There was nobody who was telling me on the play. They were just making fun of me, saying I'm an idiot for betting the Suns to win the championship. I didn't think the Suns were going to win the championship this year. That's not how it works. They'd acquired Chris Paul, and I thought they had better than 50-1 odds to win. Mm-hmm. Now they just happen to be in the driver's seat where, they're like minus 300 to win the championship. But that's kind of the play that Caleb Smith is. I don't think he's going to be the best pitcher on the slate, but I think he has a better than 1% chance of paying dividends today. So Caleb Smith playing the ownership game in baseball, that's where I go. And then the next game on the slate, the guy who I was just comparing him to, Joe Musgrove at home against the Colorado Rockies. Such a tough spot for me because I have not liked Joe Musgrove at all as of late, and he's just been a chalk pitcher that I've continually liked to stack against. However, God, this Rockies team just stinks. They're just towards the bottom of the league in WRC plus on the road and WRC plus against right-handed pitching basically every single year. But the recent results for Musgrove, especially ever since the substance crackdown, they are just so lacking. You look at Joe Musgrove, his last handful of starts against the Nationals last time out, 5 innings, 5 runs. The game before that against the Reds, 4 innings, 5 runs. The game before that was a solid enough start against the Dodgers where he only gave up 2 runs in 6 innings, but still only 5 strikeouts, 2 walks. So now we're looking at a guy, here's his strikeout to walk ratio over his last handful of starts. 4 strikeouts, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, 3 walks. These are horrendous numbers and are very concerning for a guy who pitched very well at the start of the season, and also coincidentally coincides with when baseball changed its approach to cracking down on sticky substances. So Joe Musgrove, it's certainly a good spot against the Rockies. The price point is right, but I'm undecided on what I really want to do with here. Terry, could you help guide me a little bit?
So, it's tricky. Musgrove is a pitcher that I was high on coming into the season. Padres obviously went out and got him. They were high on him. They liked some of the underlying stuff. They liked what he does with spin on the baseball. If you look at his spin rate graph on StatCast here over the last handful of games, it's affected some of his pitches, but others have stayed relatively consistent. So it's interesting where it's impacting him. He's lost a ton off of his change. It looks like he's lost a little bit on the cutter. The fastball, the slider, the curveball are all relatively stable in terms of the spin rate, particularly the slider and the curve, where we care about it a lot. So I'm kind of curious is some of this that we're seeing just a little bit of coincidental happenstance? Is it directly tied to the sticky stuff and the spin, and it's just not necessarily coming through in his graph, but he's throwing his pitches slightly differently, maybe not as confident in it's a lot of noise around this discussion, just any way we peel the onion. So it's just really hard to put our finger on it. But yeah, based on that recent performance, we have to at least discount him a little bit. Fortunately, he has stayed at a relatively consistent price in that 8,000, 9,000 range. So it's not like you have to pay up to roster him if you want to. You're going with a decent amount of the field on FanDuel. You're going with a massive amount of the field because he only costs 7,700 on DK. I do think it makes sense to roster him to give him another shot here on the blue side at least. If you wanted to get away from some of that ownership on DK, I could see going in at 30% of what the field has, something like that, and just carving off a slice. But I would definitely want to have some Musgrove here. I still do trust him enough, at least against a team that's as bad as this Rockies team. Their WRC plus against right-handers, you mentioned it. I mentioned Arizona earlier, 83 is second worst in baseball. The Rockies come in at 71. That means they're 29% worse than average creating runs against right-handed pitching. 71 compared to 83. That is a massive delta from second worst to worst in baseball. 23.2% strikeout rate. They don't strike out a ton, but they only hit 2.66% home runs, a 141 team ISO. Just a lot to attack there with a guy who is in a vacuum without any of this spin discussion and without any of these wonky variables, a good, effective pitcher. It's just we've got the wild cards of we don't exactly know what's going on. But we do have that with a lot of different pitchers, both in baseball in general and on this slate. A pretty expensive one pitching for my favorite team that we're getting to in a much worse spot going up against Houston. So, like, if I'm gun to my head, if I'm saying Joe Musgrove is going to have a better start against the Rockies or Gerrit Cole's going to have a better start against the Astros, I don't know what I'm confident in there. They project pretty well for me. I think I would probably take the guy going up against the much worse team and go with Joe Musgrove against the Rockies here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel obligated to get Joe Musgrove into my player pool. I just don't think I'm going to be even with the field. We have him projected for 50% ownership on DraftKings right now, and that's such a steep number. It's tough because I hate the Rockies. I love rostering pitchers against them, and I haven't been on Musgrove as of late. And, Emac brought up in the YouTube chat, he said, what do I think about Musgrove spin rates not changing? And, there's definitely something to that. And Terry brought it up also, is that he hasn't seen a significant dip in his spin rate. Just the results haven't been there. And to Terry's point, maybe it's just a coincidence that he kind of went into a little bit of slump, maybe developed some mechanical issues at the exact same time that the crackdown in foreign substances came. But it's such a steep drop off to the point where a guy who was such a good strikeout pitcher in the early part of this year and also last year, nobody was making contact against Joe Musgrove. He did 33.1% K rate last year. And he's just not generating strikeouts now. He's walking a whole bunch of guys. If I'm being honest, we have 7.5 hours, a little over 7 hours anyway, until the late slate locks. I don't know what I'm doing with Musgrove yet. I still have some time to think it over and see what ends up happening with the ownership in particular. I will say this 50%, that's a number that I'm not going to be getting to. But Terry, obviously you don't have to be married to this or anything, but if you were just to ballpark me right now, what do you expect if you were playing 150 lineups on DraftKings? Around what do you think your ownership would be to Musgrove as of now?
If he's at 50 coming into lock, I would probably be in the 30% range, somewhere around there. I'd be comfortably below the field on it, I think, because I think there are spots to spread out. So I don't think I agree with you. I don't think I'd be at the field's number there. On the FanDuel slate, though, if he's at 20, it might be around the field on that. So that's it's just kind of different site to site. I'm just looking through, as you were asking that, at some of the numbers on the cutter, because that was the one pitch that I did mention had a pretty decent little drop-off in the spin rate in addition to his changeup. And it looks like the cutter's as one of the specific pitches that's been hit a lot harder in recent games. than it had been, or at least by expected slugging percentage. That's jumped up dramatically with the reduction in spin on the cutter. Not like his go-to pitch. He only throws it a handful of times per game, but it's not been as effective for him. So that might be part of it. But again, it's a question of whether that's something we can point to and, all right, he's not using sticky stuff on his hand and it's particularly affecting that pitch for him, or is it just a little bit of happenstance? We just don't know.
And then on the other side, we have German Marquez starting against the San Diego Padres. Obviously a tough match for Marquez going up against San Diego, but, he's been fairly successful this year. 3.59 ERA, 3.74 expected ERA. Also keep in mind a lot of starts at Coors Field, so he has to deal with those kind of conditions. The Padres are going to be a pretty popular stack here. I don't think it's quite warranted. But with that in mind, also, I don't really know that I'm dying to roster Marquez since he is pitching against this Padres team in San Diego.
Yeah, that's how I'm seeing this one as well. Not getting any major indicators that are telling me go to Padres bats. I'll take what I get of them, but they're going to be owned enough on FanDuel that it will probably get squeezed out in my sorting process around the hitters that I want to get to anyway, like Fernando Tatis, like Manny Machado, the obvious names in that lineup. I don't think I would get to very much German Marquez. I'm not going to take him out of my player pool. I'll let him roll in Fantasy Cruncher. But I just think based on how he's projecting here, based on the matchup, it's not a great spot. He's a pitcher I like, but I like rostering him when he's going up against a weaker lineup without that much ownership. I don't love throwing pitchers into this Padres lineup. They do enough with sequential hitting, with running the bases, and they're a quality offense. So even when they're not showing major power upside indicators or anything like that, it's just an offense that unless it's a premium end pitcher, which German Marquez is not for me, I'm not going to really go there and attack them.
Next game here, another guy who's been massively affected by the spin rate discussion. Gerrit Cole, who for reasons beyond me is still the betting favorite to win the American League Cy Young. He has had a really tough time with the lack of sticky substances. Matchup against Houston, I personally can't roster Gerrit Cole in this spot. There might be a point where we start to see better results for Cole that I could go back to him. But as long as he remains expensive and the field is still on him at some sort of rate, I'd rather be on the Houston side, frankly, than Gerrit Cole. He's just basically been a mediocre pitcher. The guy who Gerrit Cole is right now, it's not bad, but he's just the guy he was in Pittsburgh, back in the day before he had the big uptick in his spin rate. So Gerrit Cole, I don't think he's necessarily an awful starting pitcher. I don't think he warrants being at his current price point in Houston. I also don't think he warrants being the current betting favorite to win the American League Cy Young. But Gerrit Cole against the Houston Astros, which side of this game are you taking, if any, Terry?
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't think I'd be rostering much Cole. I'm just looking at his game log. The last time Gerrit Cole, this is a big number, of course, but it's Gerrit Cole that we're talking about, and his price tag warrants it. Last time he struck out more than 10 hitters was May 12th. So it's been quite a while since he's had that super premium upside game. Struck out 9 hitters on June 9th in a 6-inning start. He's given us somewhat reliable depth through some of these starts, but the last time out, only 3 1/3, 5 innings to start before that against Boston. There's a lot of concerns about just his general form, everything with the sticky stuff. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that I'd be looking at him as the odds-on favorite for the Cy Young here either. And then you throw him into a Houston team that is just elite in everything they do on the offensive side of the ball. The best team in baseball at not striking out against both hands, 19.3% strikeout rate against righties this year. Best team in baseball creating runs against righties at a 120 WRC+. 3.95% home run rate is firmly above average. 1.176 team ISO is well above average. There's just a lot to love about that Houston offense. I do not like, I won't get into my thoughts about the city or anything like that, or these guys as a bunch of cheaters. But I don't like it. But I think if I was choosing one of these sides, it would be the Astros bats. It's probably, though, going to come down DFS-wise to just not taking that much Cole and not taking that much of the Astros bats, because there is always the upside that he could have, that 9-10 strikeout game and shut these guys down, even though they are the Astros. Gun to my head, I would pick the Astros bats, but I don't really love either one of those sides.
Yeah, there's spots where I've stacked against Cole as of late. However, that was also because Cole was just chalk, like uber chalk on slates. It's taken a while for the field to catch up to Gerrit Cole. Isn't quite the same pitcher, but we still saw Cole for a while, 40-50% projected ownership. It's come down a little bit to the point where I don't think there's a ton of leverage in stacking against him, but I don't really want to roster a 25% owned Gerrit Cole in Houston either. But on the other side of the game, Zach Greinke against the Yankees offense. Greinke, not the pitcher he used to be, and there isn't enough strikeout upside for me to want to roster him, but good enough also. I don't really want to stack a struggling Yankees offense against him. So another side, Greinke, not a lot of interest. Yankees offense, also not a whole bunch of interest for me.
Yeah, Greinke basically gets by on guile and just knowing how to pitch at this point. He doesn't really have that much stuff left, but he's getting it done. 111 in the third innings, only an 18.5% strikeout rate, a reasonably good 4.13 xFIP, 6.8% barrel ball rate, 12.4 degree average launch angle, but only a 33.4% hard hit and an 87.6 mile an hour average exit velo. So even guys like Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton are getting cut down in my home run model. They're both at like my number that's around an average opportunity or slightly above average to hit a home run. Everybody else in this lineup that typically do trend up at least to the average or above is coming in below it, including guys like Luke Voit, Gleyber Torres, who's had no power to speak of whatsoever this year, but it's cutting into the Yankees' power significantly. So I'm with you. I wouldn't be attacking Zach Greinke here, even though he's pitching at 88 miles an hour across the board.
Yeah, it's just he's still found ways to, limit hard contact, limit the damage. Certainly not the pitcher he was a few years ago, but better spots to target tonight than this Yankees offense. Next game here, Milwaukee Brewers going up against the Cincinnati Reds. And maybe this is just recency bias to me, but boy, it seems like the Reds and the Brewers are constantly playing series against each other. Freddie Peralta, at least off the top of my head, I could remember already that it seems like he's had a handful of starts against Cincinnati. I like Freddie Peralta a whole bunch for DFS purposes, a lot of strikeout upside. One of the most prolific strikeout pitchers in baseball, 35.4% K rate this year after a 37.6% K rate last year. Freddie Peralta earlier in his career was a guy who always had the strikeout upside, but never quite had the results as a starting pitcher. Now a 2.23 ERA, 2.56 expected ERA to go along with all the strikeout stuff. Freddie Peralta, I think, is a great pitcher to pay up for today.
Yeah, he's been spectacular. Really, really changed his game over the last season and a half, 2 seasons. 35.4% strikeout rate this year, a .90 whip despite an 11.5% walk rate. That's impressive. That just means guys aren't getting many hits. 14.3% swinging strike rate, 30.9% CSW. I'd like to see the CSW. That's a good quality number, but you'd like to see it a little bit higher given the 14.3% swinging strike rate. So something to even suggest maybe a little bit of room to improve working around the plate a little bit more. 6.8% barrel ball rate is a little high, but it's fine. 22.5 degree average launch angle, tends to get into home run trajectory, but the balls are going to fall short because he's given up 87.5 average exit velo, 34.7% hard hit. Just been spectacular through the season. 93 innings and 16 starts. Maybe not the full depth that you'd really like to see. You'd like to see these guys giving a little bit more innings, but it's fine. I think this is a good spot for him. I don't love the notion of maybe getting through 6 totally clean innings and getting to the quality start here, but I think he's got a good enough shot at giving you a decent strikeout upside that he could erase any damage that the Reds do over that kind of a term. So I think I like the spot here for Freddie. I'd be getting to a decent amount of them. 26.8% ownership projection on the FanDuel slate. I might come in a little bit below that, but it wouldn't be by much. I'd probably be at worst around the field on him.
By the way, the reason that it feels to me like Freddie Peralta has made a lot of starts against the Reds in the last 6 weeks, this is going to be his 4th start against Cincinnati. So it has happened quite a bit. Those previous performances, because I know we have a lot of people who really get hung up in previous performances, especially yesterday. Remember, people were poo-pooing Charlie Morton because he had some bad outings against the Marlins as of late. Freddie Peralta has had some weird results against the Reds this year, particularly because one of the games had a rain delay in the middle. So he only pitched 4 innings, gave up 1 run, ended up with 6 strikeouts, 2 walks. So he was well on his way to a good outing that day, and then just ended up getting cut short because of the weather. And then another outing where went 4 2/3 innings, gave up 2 runs. So overall for the year, we have one really good start against the Reds from Freddie Peralta, where he pitched 7 innings, 6 strikeouts, no walks. One good outing got cut short because of weather, and then one mediocre outing in those last 6 weeks against Cincinnati. On the other side, Vladimir Gutierrez is going to be on the mound for Cincinnati. Not a guy I think is particularly good going up against a Milwaukee Brewers offense that, while is maybe not the best offense in the league, they are slightly starting to get healthier. But once again, one of the issues I have here is just with the ownership on Milwaukee. They are expected to be pretty popular in both FanDuel and DraftKings. But one thing I will say about the ownership is they aren't projected for as much ownership as the Dodgers. They're not projected for as much ownership as the Yankees. But we do have Milwaukee with the best odds of being the highest scoring team on DraftKings today. On FanDuel, we have them just below the Dodgers. Different stack for me on different sites. To me, on FanDuel, 22% projected ownership for Brewers. That is way too high. On DK at 13.9, that feels about correct. And I want to be somewhere around even with the field on them.
Yeah, I think it's much more a DK play. I would be around the field on the DK slate as well. I agree. I think the prices are maybe a little high, but we can call them fair, I guess, when we're trending toward 5,000 for Avi Garcia, 4,500 for Omar Narvaez, 4,900 for Willy Adames. Those are probably a little bit high, but it's keeping some of that ownership away. So I think it's all right. On the FanDuel slate, those same guys, 2,700 for Willie, 25 for Omar, 31 for Avi Garcia, drawing a lot more ownership over there. Christian Yelich pumping up to around 40% owned. I just don't need these guys on the FanDuel slate. They project fairly well for me, but they're not like blowing through the top of my home run model, despite the matchup against a bad pitcher who gives up plenty of premium power, gives up a 12.4% barrel ball rate, 15.9 degree average launch angle, 90.5 mile an hour average exit velo. He walks 10.8% of hitters, got the worst BBB minus K mark on the board. So the most targetable pitcher on the board for this late slate or this main slate. It's just that ownership, and it's not creating such a bubble where I would need to get to these guys. An interesting bat, but it looks like he's drawing ownership that I was hoping maybe people would be sleeping on this spot would be Rowdy Tellez in that lineup now, but he's drawing around 20% ownership for the min price on FanDuel, so he's not going to even be sneaky. So it's going to be a tough order to get to a good amount of Brewers here. I think I'll be well under the field on them. I just don't think they're a very good team. So when I'm looking for stacks, I'm kind of looking for a few good hitters to string together. You get Christian Yelich here. That's, you're talking about an A-level hitter, a star-level hitter, despite what he's done this year. There's not another guy approaching that level in this lineup to me. So it's a tricky team to put together. I tend to be underweight on the Brewers on a lot of slates. So I think I'm going to be under on them.
All right. Particularly on FanDuel, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to either leave them out of the player pool altogether or just have very limited shares relative to the ownership, because that is a massive negative leverage score for both them and the Dodgers today. Final game on the slate, and guys, if you haven't done it already, like the video, give Terry and I a little bit of love. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel. The other thing, too, is like the video, let Terry know how you feel about his haircut, right? He doesn't want to be doing a show, look at the like numbers after the fact and be like, oh, no, I got a haircut. Nobody liked the video. Everybody must think I'm ugly. Don't let Terry think that of himself. Like the video so he knows that you guys support the haircut. Final game on the slate to bring us home. We have the Los Angeles Angels against the Seattle Mariners. Chris Flexen against Pablo Sandoval. Surprisingly decent results so far for Chris Flexen this year, although I don't really totally buy it. 3.80 ERA, 4.33 expected ERA. The reason I don't really buy into Chris Flexen's numbers is, number one, he's been terrible over the course of his career, 5.69 ERA, 5.12 FIP, but also it's just the strikeout stuff isn't there for him at all. He only has a 16.4% K rate this year, so I expect Chris Flexen to regress into the guy that we've seen earlier in his career, even though he's pitched fairly well in 85 innings this year. So I'm willing to get overweight to the field on the Angels and expecting some of that regression to come forward, to happen going forward for Chris Flexen. The Angels are one of the more positively leveraged stacks for tonight's slate. We have them with a 3.1% positive leverage score on FanDuel. On DK, the Angels more about appropriately owned, but for FanDuel, I think this is one of the lower owned stacks we actually do want to target. Whereas, we have so much over ownership going to like the Dodgers or the Brewers. So in particularly on FanDuel, Terry, what do you make of the Angels and Shohei Ohtani, who's probably going to hit another ball into the upper deck as he seems to do every day?
Yeah, I think that ball's due to land in Jersey sometime in the next hour or so. That thing was crushed last night. Unbelievable. Love the spot for him. Love the spot for Jared Walsh. I can string together some Angel stacks, but it's kind of gets concerning around kind of the same concept that I was talking about with the Brewers, in that we've got a superstar in Ohtani. We've got a good home run hitter, a kid who's really come through this year in Jared Walsh. But then you immediately get into some really shaky territory with Phil Gosselin, Max Stassi, Jose Iglesias, Taylor Ward, Juan Lagares. David Fletcher up top. I liked him through last year with his hit tool, his on-base skill. He was disappointing through the first part of this season, but now he's up to 302, 330, 367. There is no power in his bat, but maybe as like a three-man if I'm grabbing him, Ohtani, and Walsh off the top. If you want to add in like a Gosselin Stassi or a Gosselin Iglesias or a Ward, somebody like that, to stretch it out to a five-man, I have no issues with it. I think it's a good spot to attack Chris Flexen here. I just don't love those hitters. So we're getting, again, to a stack that's two premium guys that have great chance of hitting a home run, but then a lot of kind of around them. So I'm a little curious as to how it would come together. And that's part of it too, is just how it combines with other stacks, how it combines price-wise, and what pitchers I can get to in here. So it's one that I kind of would make the decision on the fly as I'm crunching lineups and seeing how they come out and getting a chance to really process what this lineup looks like when stacked with others. But it's definitely on the board for me based on the matchup. I don't think much of Flexen either. 16.4% strikeout rate this season, down from 28.0 in the KBO last year, where he pitched really well and earned himself a contract. But 4.39 xFIP compared to that ERA that you said before, only inducing 9.3% swinging strikes. Most concerningly, 23.3% combined called plus swinging strikes. There's just not a lot there for him. So I like attacking flexing here in theory. I just don't know which bats I would go to as like my focus guys. Are there any guys other than Walsh and Ohtani that you're higher on in this lineup than it sounds like I am?
Not as individual hitters, it's just for the purpose of a 5-man stack. Like I don't mind mixing in guys, like Ward, Lagares, whoever makes in just for value purposes. These guys are so cheap that if I want to pay up for 2 starting pitchers, I think it's sensible. Like you could get to Walker Buehler and Freddie Peralta with a 5-man Angel stack fairly comfortably on DraftKings, just because those bottom of the order guys are so cheap. So that's the lineup construction that makes sense to me with those guys.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for when I say, like, I want to see how it comes together, fits in with other things. If you start noticing things like that as Cruncher's running, like, oh, wow, if I use Angels, I can get to this combination of pitchers over and over again and then rotate other teams through. That's the exact kind of thing you want to look for and start building your lineups and consider. All
right, and then on the other side, Patrick Sandoval pitching against the Seattle Mariners. Funny enough, I just realized that I accidentally linked the player card in my sheet from Patrick Sandoval to Pablo Sandoval by accident. So I just clicked and I was like, why am I getting these weird hitting stats? And I was like, oh, wrong piece Sandoval. But anyway, Patrick Sandoval, he's been solid as a starting pitcher this year, although I'm a little concerned how deep he's going to work into the game. We've seen him make 11 appearances, pitch a total of 49 innings this year. So getting stretched out as a starter, but a guy who I wouldn't expect, throw 7 or 8 innings or anything like that more often than not, but 3.86 ERA, 3.85 expected ERA. His strikeout numbers look fairly decent at 26%, but don't forget, they're also buoyed because he made a lot of appearances out of the bullpen. So, or at least 3 appearances out of the bullpen. So Patrick Sandoval, to me, I don't have a massive amount of interest in him, but I don't really want to stack the Mariners against him either. So Terry, bring us home. What do you make of this matchup? Sandoval, Patrick Sandoval, not Pablo. Although Pablo Sandoval, maybe if he was pitching, I would like the Mariners to stack going up against the Seattle Mariners offense.
Now I'm just picturing like big round Pablo Sandoval trying to pitch and just like wobbling off the mound. That's a good little image. I like it. I'm pretty much with you here. I don't think I'd be getting to too much Patrick Sandoval in terms of using him as a pitcher, just based on that average length of start. He doesn't project well for innings for me, so it's not creating a good fantasy projection. I think I'd stay away. I don't really need it here. There is a little bit of strikeout upside. Mariners are 3rd worst in baseball with a 27.5% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching. Create runs 11% worse than average against lefties, but they've got a little pop. 4.08 home run rate against lefties is one of the better marks in baseball. 169 team ISO. So there's a little bit of power if they connect with them. There are hitters in this lineup that I do like on the right side of the plate, like Mitch Haniger. I think Ty France is a little bit underrated. Tom Murphy, tremendous power there. Dylan Moore, another guy, a little bit underrated, particularly around DFS, where he's got 8 home runs, 14 stolen bases on the season in only 224 plate appearances. That said, he's slashing 177, 268, 354 on the year, creating runs 24% worse than average. So kind of buyer beware around that. He's a better player than that overall. So maybe I'm stringing together a few Mariner stacks based on the power and maybe some of the speed upside. It would primarily be around the right-handed hitters, but it would be really limited. They're not getting that much ownership. They're not that expensive, so it's easy enough to do. They'd be in play, but in a limited kind of a sense for me.
All right, that is going to do it for us, guys. If you've not done so already, show Terry and his haircut some love. Like the video. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel because we've got lots more shows coming up. We have NASCAR show coming up next. There's also MMA Live Before Lock. There's the MLB Live Before Lock later. That is going to be with EMAC and Gundacker, so definitely check that out to see what kind of changes have been in ownership, whether anything along that lines. Also, thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring the show. If you guys have not signed up for PrizePicks, head on over to PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code Awesemo when you're making your first deposit. Get up to a $100 bonus on that first deposit. Good luck today, guys. Tyler, play us out.